I had this idea for the first episode of the playlist Dad After Dark. Wouldn't it be great to review the John Cassavetes 1970 independent film, Husbands? We're here as dads, presumably, anyway, some of us in that role. What more relevant pick could you hope for? But I hadn't seen this film, indeed most of Cassavetes' work, since the early 90s. The word husband really wasn't something I understood back then. I was much more into the filmmaking aspect of Cassavetes, the raw, seat-of-your-pants acting style, the improvisational scripting technique that he was reputed for, and his sheer audacity of his style of creation, starring in major Hollywood films as his day job, and taking that money and pouring it into these cheaper, personal, freeform movies embedded at the heart of American independent film. There'd possibly be no Kevin Smiths or Robert Rodriguez's or Tarantino's, Ed Burns's, maybe even Scorsese's and Raimi's, and on if John Cassavetes hadn't gone first and shown that it was possible to become a creator outside the system and still make a name for yourself within the industry. So much so that the American Independent Spirit Award's most prestigious honor to this day is the John Cassavetes Award. So I dug out my VHS copy of Husbands. And I know I've seen it somewhere on digital. It was beautiful. But all I could find was VHS. And I watched it for the first time in over 20 years. And wow, this could have been a mistake. It's not that the film isn't good, but it's monolithic. It's one of a kind, like many of his works. And it's a little problematic to talk about in 2022. In some ways, now that I'm actually a husband. My wife and I are about to celebrate 10 years together, and I'm the father of a 7-year-old girl, which, as I've said, none of these things were on my radar when I first fell in love with this director decades ago. Well, I do want to get this off my chest before I say anything else. I want to dispense with this idea that the creation of a film assumes celebration of what its main character is all about. For me, that cheapens the art form and cheats the viewer of a richer experience, of a more provocative, honest experience to be had when a film's characters are flawed. And man, do these characters fall into that category. They are at times terrible to each other, to themselves, to their families, to strangers, but they are at all times very human. You know people like this. Maybe you've been people like this. Maybe you've stopped being people like this for one reason or another. And that's all part of the point in Cassavetes, I think. Sometimes his characters don't quite grow or grow very little or just learn to cope with each other and with themselves. And that's what we have here in our three main characters. Husband starts out with a quick photo montage of 4 lifelong friends, married, now middle-aged and living on the same block, with houses, kids, wives, extended family, all mixed together. That in itself is a throwback to when things were more like that and serves the story here pretty well. And one of the 4 men, who we never meet, has died before the first scene. It's at his funeral, actually, the 3 remaining friends grappling with the shake-up to their lives. The 3 surviving husbands, played by Cassavetes, Peter Falk, and Ben Gazzara, come a bit unglued at their loss, and we follow them on a 2-day bender, still in their black suits from the funeral, as they bar hop, walk around New York, goof around, go to the YMCA, they play basketball while smoking furiously, they ride the subway, sing, vomit. There's a 10-minute scene in a men's room of a dive bar where they talk about the past while retching and arguing and fighting and occasionally revealing a truth about themselves or how they feel about the others. I have to admit, it's kind of disgusting at times, but it's brave acting of a sort that we don't get much of anymore. And it underscores Cassavetes' philosophy on writing his movies. He doesn't care much about plot. It's there, even though it's buried sometimes. But I don't feel like I can tell you about the film, really, by telling you its plot. I'm going to. But one of his more famous quotes is advice to young filmmakers. Don't worry about plot. Worry about character. Go enough into character and your plot, your story, will emerge. And that is on full display here. One of the most revealing passages of the film comes as each of the 3 men deals with calling their wives after the drinking spree. They still haven't gone home. Harry, Ben Gazzara, declares that he's not going home. He's going to London for no particular reason. He's just cutting loose. This is just 1970, so maybe he's heard of the swinging London scene. Who knows? But he's going. The other two sense that there seems to be something wrong with Harry. He's taking this harder than they are, and maybe they shouldn't leave him alone. Gus, played by Cassavetes, calls his wife, Jeannie, who's his actual wife's name, Jenna Rollins, in real life, and he glosses over how they've been MIA for 2 days and asks her to find his passport. He's going to go take Harry to London and come right back home. And while she's at it, can she go next door and get Archie's passport from his wife so he doesn't have to face her yet? Then it's time to get Ben Gazzara's passport. And what follows is a very disturbing scene as he confronts his wife. A fight breaks out. There's a knife involved. It's insane, but it's very real. It's very much the type of sad, pathetic, domestic horror show that if you haven't seen it in your lifetime, you're kind of lucky. Maybe a bit deprived, but mostly lucky. Now the three men are on the plane. They get to London. It rains the whole time. No sightseeing. No change of scene. Rain. They drink. They gamble. Soon they try their hand at cheap pickup lines with women they find in the casino. Peter Falk has a scene with a woman much older than him. So cringy, but you can't look away. Finally, they're back at the hotel with 3 women. Now, here's a dilemma of the film from a more modern sensibility, perhaps. The men here all seemingly commit adultery. Or if they don't, they try. Except maybe Peter Falk, but they seem to be trying to prove something to themselves or maybe to each other, that they're not that old, not next in line for a casket. But it's like watching an accident in slow motion as they try their hand at feeling young and virile again. And it's a mess. It's a failure. It's hilarious. It's embarrassing. And you can't not watch. The next morning, Gus and Archie announced to Harry, Ben Gazzara, that they've had enough.
What? Going home.
But he's not only finished with the woman he was with, now there are 3 new women, completely new characters in his hotel room, setting up the whole group to start it all over again that night. It's insane. Harry, in the end, decides he's never going back to America, just leaving his wife, kids, mother-in-law who seems to live with them, and suddenly he's just out of the picture. Now they've lost Harry. Now there's more urgency for the other 2 to pick up the pieces. Gus and Archie get on the next plane and just leave without him. We cut to the plane. The group of 4 from the beginning is now down to 2, Gus and Archie, Cassavetes and Falk, great friends in real life. Before long, Cassavetes is actually appearing as a murderer on an episode of Columbo, and it's fun to check out after seeing them together here. The cab pulls up. They live on the same block in adjoining houses. They've obviously stopped at an airport gift shop and bought identical bags of toys for their kids as a peace offering for being away. Falk goes inside first. He pauses for a moment and yells over to him, "What's he going to do without us?" But what he's really kind of saying is, who are we now? Who are any of the 4 of us now? The lifelong friends identified themselves through this social group, this lifestyle. They've lost 2 friends, one to physical death and the other to emotional death. They each go in to face the music. And now we're just here with Cassavetes. His very young daughter, maybe 2 or 3 years old, ambles up, crying at him. Now, this is his real family in the film. His daughter cries to see her dad finally home is really his daughter, John Cassavetes' daughter, crying to see him. It's very personal, intimate filmmaking where it's all hands on deck. And he just lets the camera roll for a minute on her. For a moment, you just feel lost with all of these characters, their lives, everything you just witnessed, and you feel lost in the movie. And Cassavetes lets his camera continue to roll on his real-life daughter, just crying. And after all the treatment of all the women in this film, in the universe of this film, suddenly, for maybe the first time in the whole movie, you sense that there's a director. He's intentionally capturing this young girl crying because that's what happened. It's amazing. And he found sort of the core of this story accidentally, and that was Cassavetes' gift. You realize he knows, he sees how terrible this all is. He sees how terrible his characters are, their self-deceptions, the phony macho 70s middle-class mentality. We watch her crying for all of this, not explicitly, of course, but she's crying for all the girls, all the women they become, and for how awfully the men in their lives feel they have license to treat them, and for the men, too, of this time and place who don't know another way. It feels like that's what somehow presciently this little girl is crying over. She's crying over her future with people like these. And we're left with a father after everything we've seen him do. And we see for a moment he has this tender side. There's dim hope that maybe he'll figure something out, a way to be better. Or maybe the next generation may figure it out. But then they go inside, and that's the end. It's poignant. It's sort of depressing. And this is the best character in the film of the bunch, of the three that we met. If he feels trapped, it's 1970. Macho is a real thing. John Wayne still has 10 more movies in him at this point. And this is the American middle-class male mind of that era. These are, as the title suggests, its husbands. Now, can these characters grow, or is it too late? Can they cope with their lives? Harry doesn't. But in Cassavetes, the internal struggle, or the journey of characters that seemed stuck in amber at one moment, can suddenly rebel and burst out, rage at themselves, at everything around them. And suddenly you have some hope, some small hope. Now, he as a filmmaker isn't interested in plot, as we've said, as much as he is in characters and crisis. When asked what motivated him to make movies, he once said, and I'm paraphrasing, "When a character can't find their way home, that's when I think it's interesting to make a film. When they're lost. Why would I want to make a film about something I already understand?" Guys, if you can take the sheer unvarnished honesty here in this type of film, it's a masterclass in catching the emotional journey of and the pitfalls of the things modern American men are at least trying to do better at. It's a lot to think about, and it's hard to take at times. Now, if you're a budding filmmaker, you owe it to yourself to watch Cassavetes, this film, and all of his others. Maybe you can focus on the raw humanity he captures, the unique performances, and the economical filmmaking style that cuts you to the quick with its virtuosity and its simplicity sometimes. And you can maybe apply those lessons to your own work. John Cassavetes is why I bought this 16mm camera back in 1999, had it tuned up in Hollywood, and let it sit on a shelf for 20 years because film is so expensive. But you folks coming up with these cheap digital cinema cameras, please don't waste time. Cassavetes shows that you can do it now. Start today. Write something now, just with the people that you know, that you can explore on the cheap with what's around you. You don't know how lucky you are for that, and that YouTube is even a thing. Watch Shadows, watch Faces, watch Woman Under the Influence. There's a great 3-hour documentary on John Cassavetes' filmmaking called A Constant Forge, and some very inspiring, illuminating books, especially Cassavetes on Cassavetes by Ray Carney, who's a nice guy. I wrote to him once, and he sent me some rare stuff on the guy. There's a book called Life Works. There's a newer book out that I haven't read. I can't think of the title right now, but I will read it. The man's a perennial inspiration, and that's my point. So check him out. For now, Husbands is a perfect Dad After Dark experience for the up-late dad when everyone else is in bed and you can finally watch something a little out of the ordinary. It's possibly for no one else. It may not be for you, but check it out and see. Until next time, I'm Tom, and we'll see you soon.
At first there were 4 of us, and now there are 3 of us, and you want to be alone. All right. Then I might as well be alone.